And so without further ado, please welcome to the stage Mr. Ralph Winter. A conversation with Ralph Winter. He's generously agreed to talk about his entire career with us. Well, of course, we won't be able to fit that into an hour, but we'll do our best. So, I'm going to bring some chairs over, and we'll sit down and we'll talk a little bit more. So, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. It's very kind. It's nice to be recognized. I appreciate that. Thank you. And this is an honor and a privilege to come and be with you guys. I said earlier that I think what you do here in fostering the conversation and dialogue about media and movies and storytelling and faith. There's not many places in the world that happens. And so I think you're in a very special place. And so I'm happy to be part of that. Thank
you. When it comes to looking at Ralph Winter from the outside, obviously, you know, your life is composed of many threads. Some of the prominent ones are your life as a believer and your vocation as a producer. So I'd like to start in those two places. Could you tell me a little bit about your development as a Christian throughout your life?
I'm very fortunate to have grown up in a church, a Presbyterian church in Southern California, and my parents are Christians, and they were very instrumental in being sure that I was, brought up and educated in a church that was very strong about biblical knowledge, and so I think that was good. And there was when I old, so when I grew up, it was in the '60s, and there was the Jesus movement and all of that, and the grounding in the Presbyterian church and Bible studies and youth ministry and youth groups was really instrumental in, framing the questions for me as a kid and developing those more in high school. So I accepted Christ when I was 12 at a Union Rescue Mission ranch, and then sort of rededicated my life when I was in high school, beginning to understand a little more about what life is about. And so I've been married a long time. For 100 years, and I've been a part of small groups and things like that have really helped shape and support and nourish and encourage my journey as someone who's trying to follow Christ. And I think I said at dinner time that I don't know how you do it alone. You have to have that kind of infrastructure and support system, particularly in the movie business, the television media business today. I don't think you can do it alone. You have to find some kind of partnership, some kind of relationships to maintain that.
Well, and that seems like a good segue, the idea of establishing these relationships while you're in the movie business. So tell us a little bit about getting into the movie business. I know that when you went to college, you didn't think you were going to end up as a Hollywood producer. You had different things in mind.
I'm a history major that went to Berkeley. I didn't come from, I don't have any family relationships. Nobody in my family worked in the business. I had no idea that I would be involved in that. I got a job when I graduated at Broadway department stores like a Macy's or whatever. And I was hired to help them produce their industrial videos, how to get employees to ring the register, how to approach customers, how to take inventory. Pretty boring crap.
Really, that's where you learn how to produce the thrill rides that you're now known for?
But I had fun and tried to make fun, have fun doing it. So I made a couple of videos. I didn't have anyone telling me how to do it. They just knew it needed to get done. And there's this kid down there that'll do it. And like, okay, fine, you just do it. So they'd have, you know, programs about employee benefits, and they'd have, you know, charts and graphs about engulf and devour and how big that was and how little you would make and all these things. And so I was not going to do that. And so I hired an out-of-work Hollywood writer, and we together crafted a story about in the days when you used to go into the bank to deposit your check. And there's a younger guy behind an older woman, and she's got, you know, she's got her, my notes, sorry. She's got her paycheck and stub, and she's got it behind her head, and she's scratching her head, and he is behind her, and he kind of, you know, tries to get a peek at it. And she sees him, and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you know, didn't mean to intrude. I thought you worked at the Broadway where I work." And she goes, "No." And he says, "You know, where I work at the Broadway, I get an employee discount. Everything I buy at the Broadway, I get 15% off." And he takes the check out of her hand, and he goes, "It's worth about 15% of your check." And he starts to go, "How many holidays do you get?" And he keeps going through the process, and they keep tearing up the check until she gets to the door, to the counter, and she's tearing up her paycheck, and they walk off in the sunset. She kind of get a job at the Broadway. And so I went to stores, and I talked to the store managers, and I said, "I want to try this piece with you." And so have these employees come in. You can imagine department store employees want to come into a meeting. It's like, ugh, what am I here for? They come in, and I put a piece of paper in front of them, and I said, write down all the reasons. Well, write down the benefits of working at the Broadway. And so they, why am I here? And, you know, they'd scribble something. Then I'd show them the video, then I put another piece of paper, and the learning curve was dramatic. So about 3 weeks later, I get called by personnel, and they say, you know, the vice president wants to see you. And I go up, and she says, "So I understand that you spent $3,000 of our money making videos about employees tearing up their paychecks." And I said, "Well, not really, but here's the research and what we did." And she looked at all that and says, "Okay, don't do that again." So after a number of those messages, I realized I wasn't destined to be at the Broadway making industrial videos. But I got through a friend, got an opportunity to move to Paramount, move in post-production. I knew about video, they knew about film. They wanted Mork and Mindy Happy Days on tape and not on film. So I was there to help that transition. Nobody told the producers of Mork and Mindy and Laverne and Shirley they wanted to do that. And so I learned film. And I was there for a few years. Most notably working on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, got to know those filmmakers. And when that was over, they wanted me to come work for them, so I left the studio. So to me, as a history major, this was all not my plan and just the way things unfolded. And so it's definitely providential that it moved in that sequence, and I've been fortunate to mostly work ever since.
When it comes to personnel who are behind the camera, that are used to sell films, sometimes it's the writer, so by the writer of, but most often it's the director or the producer, by the director of or by the producer of. Most people have an intuitive sense of what a director does, but a lot of people are kind of unclear on what a producer does. So what exactly is it that you ended up doing as you transitioned into this larger role, particularly when you started working on the Star Trek films?
This is the same question that my wife has been asking me for years. What do you do?
Do you have a good answer?
I don't know. You know, generally, actually the producer is kind of the least important. I think when you go see a movie, the first question that your friends ask you is, well, who's in it? What's it about? It might be about the director. Unfortunately, it's not about the writer. And it's rarely about the producer. It's an unsung kind of job, I think. But the final award at the Oscars goes to the Best Picture. And the Best Picture Oscar goes to the producer. Because someone has to be the champion. Someone has to be the one who carries the flag across the finish line. Someone has to lead the team, find the property, find the director, the writer, develop it, cast it, help the crew, put the crew together, manage it on a day-to-day basis, on long days, where the buck stops with that person. And then through the post-production, through the marketing, the distribution, the exploitation of all the different windows to try to get the money back to the investors, that person or group of people is the producer. And the Academy allows 2 or 3 people to get that award every year, and it's the most anticipated award at the Oscars. That's what a producer does. There are executive producers, co-producers, line producers, co-executive, associate, co-producers. You know, they're all necessary, but the responsibility lays with the producer on a movie.
So, is Star Trek, you know, that was one of the first film series that you worked extensively on and were with for a long time. So talk a little bit about this, because you are coming into a newly successful franchise. Star Trek was a TV series, primarily had a cult following, and in the wake of the success of science fiction films like Star Wars, Star Trek was brought to the big screen, and particularly with Wrath of Khan, that's where we had this crossover. It really reached a mainstream audience. So talk about how you were thinking about this coming to this new potential series. I mean, you were coming into it as a series with really full-fledged with Star Trek 3.
First day on the job at Paramount, I'm in the commissary getting lunch, and I'm in a line with guys that are 6'8" in full Klingon makeup. And I don't know what's happening. I'm in like a time warp. I don't know what's going on here. This was where you get food. You know, I don't know what's going on. And so I was there in post-production through the making of the first Star Trek, which made its money back, but creatively was kind of a disaster. In one of the later movies, we ran Star Trek the motion picture as a reference for what we were doing. And it got near the end of the movie, and the squawk box in the screening room, the projectionist said, "We have a problem." You pick up the phone. I pick up the phone. He goes, "We left out a reel in the journey through V'ger." And I go, "It's okay, no one noticed." And the movie was 2 hours and 30 minutes, and you know, unless you were smoking something you shouldn't be, it really wasn't that interesting. So to develop the movies further, the studio said, we're going to make these movies through the TV division, and that's where Harv Bennett came in. He had known Barry Diller over the years, and there was a famous conversation with Harv and with the head of, now I don't get the Mel Brooks name, in Gulf and Devour, Gulf and Western, sorry. And he asked Harv if you can make a movie for less than $40 million, and Harv said, I can make 4. So the first, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan was made for $12 million. And so I was a part of that, part of the making of that picture. And I think what might be relevant for this crowd is that when we previewed the movie, you know, one of the controversies that was happening at that time was that we were going to kill Spock. And there was a letter writing campaign pre-internet of, you can't kill Spock. You can't do it. I mean, bags and bags of letters. So we previewed the movie, and the audience came out and they were pissed. They were just angry. And so I remember we all traipsed up to an executive office, and Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner and Barry Diller, all these luminaries that were there at the time, along with all of us who were the filmmakers, or 5 or 6 of us, and the post-production that we were helping was in the post. And it was Michael Eisner who came up with the solution. And he said, what we just showed the audience was the crucifixion. We haven't showed them Easter. And this Jewish cultural knows the story very well. We designed one more shot that night. And we went to Golden Gate Park, and after Spock's casket is shot out into space, we did one shot in Golden Gate Park, going through ferns, fog, to come across and come up on the casket to show that there was hope, that there was a chance of a new beginning, a new life on this Genesis planet. And that movie made a lot of money. And that movie launched that franchise to then a series of movies. 2, 3, and 4 were kind of a trilogy of movies. And part of my participation on 2 It allowed me to leave the studio and then be hired by the filmmakers, and so I was off on that journey. But it was really Harv Bennett who was the writer-producer who conceived of all that and made that happen, and he was a mentor for me, and so it was pretty fun to be there at that time. Very lucky.
Right. And one of the contrasts that is often drawn between the very first film and those 3 subsequent films is this focus on the family of the Starship Enterprise, the characters and their interrelationships, and it seemed to give the films a heart where it didn't when it took shape in the very first film.
Well, that's what the series was about. And what's easier in a television series that this week it can be Sulu, and next week it can be Jimmy. And in a movie, everybody has to be involved in the caper. Everyone has to have something to do besides just carrying water up to James T. Kirk and let him make all the decisions. So that was always a challenge with multiple heroes like in X-Men or Fantastic Four. It's very difficult to design the story and structure it in such a way that everyone has a meaningful role, and that Nichelle Nichols doesn't feel like she's the galactic telephone operator. And it's hard to do. It's tricky. It's easier to do with a singular hero. It's harder to do with a group.
I want to ask you, as the series began to develop, we started to explore some heady issues, which is something that is enabled by science fiction, because science fiction takes place someplace else, even though it's kind of like our place. And as we move forward, one of the things that happened was that with a film, the film Star Trek V, we dealt with something very large, and it was the search for God. Now I bring this up because you've mentioned this before, and you identified yourself as the producer who almost killed Star Trek, referring to that film.
Sure.
Now, in some ways, it would seem a natural thing, right? In that we have science fiction, which can serve as a metaphorical basis to deal with larger issues. But there's problems with this idea that we're out there in space searching for God. What were the problems? What did you learn from it? Because we went on to have another successful film after that. You made Star Trek VI.
Yeah, it was a difficult. What's interesting is there's so many things that were going on at the time, and part of it, as we look back, as I look back on it, is in some ways we were smoking our own press release. We thought we could do anything, and that wasn't the case. And inadvertently, I think if you go back and watch the motion picture and you watch Star Trek V, they're very similar, searching for God. And I think we wanted to take on bigger topics. We wanted to go in a bigger direction, and it was very traditional to sort of take on those philosophical axioms in Star Trek. But and it was Bill's first movie to direct. He had agreed to be in Star Trek IV if he could direct Star Trek V. And there was just this perfect storm of things that affected all of that. And the movie was not good. The visual effects were horrible. I wanted to move away from ILM and try to save money, and it was a disaster. We were just, led down a path that would never be successful. We tried a lot of innovative things. We had fun making the movie. We thought we were doing the right thing. And in fact, it's easy to get distracted. It's easy to get unfocused. And it's the lowest performing of all the movies. And it almost killed the franchise. It almost killed my career. We did recover with Star Trek VI. We had also talked at that time about not doing Star Trek VI, but doing a trilogy of movies. Because we had demonstrated that we could show you and make you believe in a young Spock, that we should meet all three at the Starfleet Academy. And the Starfleet Academy was the name of the script that we developed. But ultimately, the studio wanted to celebrate the 25th anniversary, wanted the original cast, so we made Star Trek VI, which is sort of a story about the Cold War. And so ironically, again, I don't know where these years went, but now they're talking about the 50th anniversary and doing something similar.
Just so all of you know, when we were talking just now,
Ralph mentioned Bill as the director, which is William Shatner, Captain Kirk. Ralph just knows well enough that he calls him Bill. I want to move on to another franchise. I want to talk a little bit about the X-Men.
Sure.